Today on America's Test Kitchen, Bridget prepares slow-roasted bone-in pork rib roast. Adam reviews freezer storage bags. Lisa reviews storage gadgets. And Dan cooks roasted butternut squash. Right here on America's Test Kitchen.
You all know the song Puttin' on the Ritz. It goes like this. Dressed up like $1 million trooper, trying hard to be just like Gary Cooper, super duper. How come cows get all the fun? A prime rib roast gets all dressed up for Saturday night, and me, a pork rib roast, is only for Sunday supper. Guess what? I can sing, I can dance. In fact, I taste even better than beef. So let's go into the test kitchen with Bridget and put on the Ritz with me, a pork rib roast. So I'm excited. I got all dressed up. We're going to put on the Ritz with pork. And that kind of rhymes. Sort of.
Not even close, but you're right. We are really going to dress up a pork rib roast, make it a special occasion roast, as it should be. You want to buy a 4 to 5 pound center cut roast. And if you see here, this is basically the center cut loin with just the ribs attached. So the reason that we wanted to buy a pork roast with the ribs still on is they protect the meat from overcooking. But the ribs also get in the way of seasoning getting all the way through to the meat. So we're actually going to detach the bones. We want to take a boning knife, start making passes right along the bone. You just want to almost scrape those bones with your knife. Sometimes there'll be a little bone attached there. So now we have the ribs separate from this roast. All right, so I'm just going to set this aside. So I've got a tablespoon of kosher salt. If you can mix that with 2 tablespoons of dark brown sugar. We're going to use the salt and the sugar as a rub and allow time to allow that salt to flavor and penetrate into the meat. I'll go ahead and pat the roast dry because we don't want any moisture mingling with that sugar and making a mess. We want it to act more as a dry rub. We want the fat cap to measure about 1/4 inch thick. So you can see here there's a little bit more of that fat cap. Just going to remove some of it. Don't want to take too much of the meat with it. So I just made a little flap, and then it's very easy for me to pull that fat away. And again, a little bit of fat is good. All right, that's looking pretty good. Now I'm going to switch over to my chef's knife. We'll make 1 inch apart, cross-hatching right through the fat, but not into the meat. And this is going to help with rendering, and it's also going to help the salt to penetrate and flavor the meat. Now, you don't want to cut into the meat itself because that will be an exit point for all the juices to come out. So now we can go ahead and work the salt and sugar rub all into the meat, making sure that we work it into those crevices. Now, the brown sugar is going to be great, too, because not only is it going to add sweetness, which is beautiful with pork, it's going to give some great color to this. I'm going to go ahead and place bones on a plate, pork back on the bones, and then I've got a piece of plastic here. We'll go ahead and cover this, and then this goes into the refrigerator to allow that salt to work through. That's going to take a minimum of 6 hours, but you can do it a day in advance. All right, Chris. The pork is out of the fridge. We're ready to move on, and it's just about ready to go into the oven, but we do want to season it with 1.5 teaspoons of pepper, and now we can get it all over the pork loin just like the salt. All right, so now we want to return the pork to the bones, and we're going to tie them back up together. So I've got 3 pieces of twine here, 1 string right in the middle, simple double knot, and then 1 at each end. Okay, and now just to snip away the excess twine here. All right, last step. This is going to go fat cap side up on a wire rack placed over a rimmed baking sheet. Now we're using a really, really low oven, very similar to that we do with prime rib. It's 250 degrees. And then this is going to roast for 3 to 4 hours. We're going to end up with much more evenly cooked meat because that heat is going to slowly work through the meat. All right, Chris, our special occasion pork roast gets an equally fantastic sauce, and we're making kind of a play on a beurre rouge. This is a cup of dried cherries. I put them in 2 cups of tawny port, microwave them for a minute or 2 just to heat up the liquid, and then let the cherries steep in the tawny port for about 10 minutes, and they're nice and plump, and we're ready to proceed. So I want to strain this right into my saucepan, pressing on those cherries. And we're going to reserve the cherries on the side. We don't want to overcook them so that they turn to mush. We're going to add them right back toward the end. So to the port, I'll add a half cup of balsamic vinegar and a few sprigs of thyme, 4 to be exact. I have 2 minced shallots. Now we're going to bring this up to the boil, and then once it's there, I'll reduce the heat just a bit. We want to simmer it over medium heat until the volume is reduced down to 3/4 cup. That's going to take a good 15 minutes. All right, our port and our balsamic has reduced down to 3/4 cup. So now, before I add the butter, which would naturally be the next step, I'm going to add a 1/4 cup of heavy cream. And this is the key to making a more stable emulsion. The cream has a lot of casein proteins in it. The casein is going to surround those butter particles and prevent them from splitting. So we're going to have a much more stable sauce. Now this again needs to reduce down for about 5 minutes until it again is 3/4 cup. So now it's time to put in the butter. But before I do that, I want to search and rescue for my 4 sprigs of thyme. And now I've turned off the heat because we do want to whisk in the butter. Now this is 16 tablespoons unsalted butter that we've cut into 1/2-inch pieces, very cold, and that's going to help the sauce stay in an emulsion. So I want to only add a few pieces at a time, whisking them in, and that way it will help the butter melt evenly and again create that emulsion. If we add too many too quickly, it'll start to split. So once the butter looks mostly whisked in, we can go ahead and add a few more pieces. So I'll continue doing this until all the butter is added. All right, let's add in the last few pieces of butter, and you can see how thick and luscious that sauce is. Returning the plumped cherries right back at the end, and 2 teaspoons of fresh thyme, minced. We've got a teaspoon of salt and a 1/2 teaspoon of black pepper. And this is the sauce. Now this is so stable, we don't have to worry about letting it cool down and then reheating it, worry about it splitting. We can actually just put the lid on, if you wouldn't mind handing me that lid, and let this sit here, and now we can wait for the pork. She is a looker. It's time to take that beautiful pork roast out of the oven.
That does look spectacular.
It does look spectacular, lots of good color on there. But now we want to let this rest for 30 minutes. I'm going to tent it with foil. Now after 30 minutes, I'm going to go ahead and place this back in the oven under a preheated broiler for another 5 or 6 minutes. We really want to get that top, that fat cap, nice and browned and crackling. All right, time for this to come out of the oven for good this time, I promise. Now look at that top. Crisp and crackling. So we don't need to let this rest again. Remember, it rested for 30 minutes, but I do want to remove it from the pan. I'll go ahead and transfer this to my carving board here. There we go. Oh, need to remove the twine. And now, to make it easier for me to carve, I'll simply pull the meat from the bones. It kind of adheres itself back onto the bones a little bit. You can just simply pull it away. And believe you me, I am going to snack on that later.
This is not being thrown out.
No way. No way. I'm going to go ahead and cut this into 3/4-inch slices. It's a nice big slice of meat. Oh, look how juicy that is.
Now, we did decide to do one where we roasted it but did not let it rest, and we cut right into it. We have it right over here. This is what happens.
Hey, would you like some soup with your pork?
The whole thing is just full of juice. So it turns out if you don't let it rest, you cut it, all the juices come out. After all that work, you get a dry piece of pork.
All right, so can't forget our beautiful port wine and cherry sauce. Oh, look at that. Thick and rich.
Lots of sauce.
Buttery, yes. That pork is so tender, and there's not a bit of it that is overcooked. It's the same color from the very center to the very edge, and that's that really slow oven, nice 250-degree heat.
You know, it's tender, it's juicy, the sauce is fabulous. I like the nice crisp top under the broiler. So for a fabulous slow-roasted pork rib roast, we started with a center cut, took it off the ribs, brown sugar and salt, put that back together in the fridge for 6 hours or overnight, came back, tied it up in a very low oven for 3 to 4 hours. Meanwhile, we made the beurre rouge, little port, cherries, and the secret was a little heavy cream to emulsify that sauce so it wouldn't break. Finally, we took the roast out for 30 minutes to let it rest, and then under the broiler for 2 or 3 minutes to get that fat cap nice and crispy. So from America's Test Kitchen to your kitchen, a fabulous Saturday night holiday dress-up roast, a slow roasted pork rib roast, fit for me, the king.
Oh, brother.
I'm here in the equipment corner because I don't care. I don't care about freezer storage bags. I just buy whatever is on sale. You use them, you throw them out. They're disposable. Who cares? Well, it turns out that Adam obviously has a very different point of view. You're trying to convince me that I should care about brand.
You should
Good
know
luck.
better, and I'm going to help you learn better. Chris, we had a previous favorite freezer storage bag. We found out it might be discontinued, so we went back to the drawing board. 4 of them were from the supermarket, 2 were commercial food service products available in bulk, and 2 were eco-friendly. They were all gallon size, which is the most practical size really for us in the test kitchen and home kitchens. They were all freezer bags, which means generally the plastic is a little thicker than just a food storage bag. The first thing is these things should be fairly easy to fill. And this one was super easy to fill because it had a fold-out panel on the bottom, 2.5 inches. So it would sit flat when you had the zipper open and you could fill it up with the food, and it was a breeze that way. There were 2 others that were remarkably easy to fill. That's this one. It's got a 2-inch collar of reinforced plastic right at the top, which gave it extra structure when you fold it over so it would stay open. This one was the thickest plastic of all, and this also stayed open pretty easily when you fold it over the top to fill it. Once they're filled with food, they should be pretty simple to seal, and I want you to try that one there. There are 2 types. One is this slider system, and you have the other type there. That's the zipper lock system.
Life is too short for this because you can't, it's so thin, it's hard to line them up. Right?
You have the same
Yeah.
frustration the testers
Yeah,
did.
no.
Exactly. The channel
No,
is
thank you.
petite, the groove
Yeah.
is petite. Why don't you try that one next to it? That's the zipper lock that testers thought was
Done.
much
Zip, it's done.
easier. Chris, this is the other style of closer. This is just a sliding tab that is really easy to use, but we learned later on that it's not as secure as it should be. Now, these are freezer storage bags, so we tested them in protecting frozen foods. We used pork chops, hamburger patties, portions of cookie dough, and white bread. Put them in the bag, sealed them up, froze them for 2 months, and checked them periodically for freezer burn. We wanted to come up with one more test for the seal. We did that here in the test kitchen using desiccant, which are those moisture-absorbent crystals that you find in packaging a lot of times. We sealed up the desiccant in the bags, submerged them in water, left them for a week. We weighed the desiccant when we sealed it up, and then when we pulled it back out a week later, we re-weighed the desiccant to see whether it was heavier. If it was heavier, it would have absorbed moisture that got into the bag. This one did a fantastic job. It was like hundredths of a gram heavier. That's it. Other ones failed completely. The desiccant was floating in the container. So this bag was one of the top performers in the desiccant tests. It did really, really well. Now remember before when I talked about the sliders, we did a little abuse testing also. We filled each one of these bags with 12 cups of tomato sauce, chucked them off a counter. 4 of them failed, 4 of them didn't fail. We also shook them over a sink. The slider tabs were not as secure as some of the other ones. In the end, this was our winning freezer storage bag. This is the Ziploc brand double zipper gallon freezer bags with Smart Zip Plus. It was pretty easy to fill. It's got that reinforced collar up here. It's got a big beefy seal that's easy to tell when it's sealed. It stayed sealed. It